Welcome everyone to the MWBE Support Grants RFP webinar. We'll get started in a couple minutes. We're just giving some time for people to filter in. And just so you're aware as you come in, we are recording this webinar. So if you do not wish to be in the recording, please make sure to turn off your video and to mute yourself. Again, thanks to all of you for joining. Welcome to the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Support Grants RFP. We'll get started in just a few minutes as folks filter in. So for those of you who just joined, welcome to the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Support Grants RFP webinar. We'll get started at approximately 1:03, so another minute or so. We just want to give some time for folks to filter in. And just for those of you who just joined, this webinar is being recorded. So if you do not wish to be on the recording, please mute yourself and please turn off your video. While we're waiting for folks to join, I invite you to put your name, your organization, and your contact info in the chat, especially if you're looking for partners and like to share your ideas with other partners. We will be creating a networking list that we will post to the website in the near future. So please put your name, your pronouns if you'd like, your organization, and your contact info into the chat. So I do have several of my colleagues on as well currently. So I see at this moment, Camilla, Janelle, Jennifer, and Stephanie. They will be helping you out in the chat throughout the webinar. So feel free, if you have a question that you prefer to ask directly to one of them, you're welcome to reach out to them. So we will get started in a couple seconds. Again, welcome to those of you who just joined. This is the webinar for the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Support Grants RFP opportunity. The webinar is being recorded. So if you do not wish to be on the recording, please self-mute yourself and please turn off your video. And it looks like the last couple individuals are filtering now. So we will get started. But as a final reminder, several final reminders. This is the Minority and Women-Owned Business Enterprise Support Grants RFP webinar. This webinar is being recorded. So please, if you do not wish to be in the recording, turn off your video and self-mute yourself. And I do invite you to please put your name, your pronouns, your organization, and your contact info if you're comfortable in the chat box. We will be trying to facilitate networking. So we will be putting contact infos and names of people who want to partner onto a list that will be eventually posted on the website. So with that, let's get started. Here's a quick look at the agenda for this webinar. We'll go over why we're doing this solicitation. We'll talk about the targets, eligibility, and then please take note that there are two spaces for, sorry about that. There are two spaces for question and answer. So if you can, please reserve and hold your questions until then. If you have a urgent question, you are welcome to try to unmute yourself and jump in and ask me the question in the middle, but I would suggest holding your questions to the 2 points in the middle and at the end. So after the first Q&A section, we will go through selection criteria, how we're going to be scoring the responses. We'll give you some examples of what we've seen in the space, the timeline, and then how you can also get further feedback on your concepts. So going forward, we're doing this solicitation because the legislator did pass a funding source for MassCEC to administer. That's very helpful. There's 2 targets under that funding source: supporting minority and women-owned business enterprises that are trying to enter or expand in the clean energy sector, and also supporting job training pipelines to provide needed workforce for those MWBEs and existing clean energy companies that are currently operating. And that's, a great way of looking at it, because we know that currently a lot of the clean energy organizations out there are dominated by Caucasian white males ownership. And we see that, in terms of hiring more diverse individuals into the sector, one of the needs is to increase, ownership by individuals who look like the target populations we're trying to benefit. So going on, so the way we define minority and women-owned business enterprises under this solicitation and then through that legislation, it's not strictly by certification. If you do not have recognition from the SDO office, the Supplier Diversity Office, or the state as a certified minority or women-owned business enterprise, you can still be viewed as MWBE under this solicitation, so long as you meet the terms that you see here. So greater than 50% ownership by minorities or women principals. If you have certification, that makes it easy. If you don't, you have ownership or founding in place that would allow you to eventually get certification. You do not have to be incorporated, but obviously it's better if you're incorporating the state, especially applicants. As we get later to the eligibility for actual lead applicants, you have to be operating in Massachusetts. So with that said, the targeted populations that generally MassCEC is trying to benefit, you can see here we have 4 categories. For this solicitation, the MWBEs that you may end up supporting do not have to be in one of these 4 categories, so long as they meet the criteria of an MWBE that you saw on the previous slide. However, in the scoring process, we do look favorably upon support programs that not just support MWBEs, but MWBEs that have some impact in these populations. So in environmental justice neighborhoods, in areas that you find the federally recognized and state acknowledged tribes, other areas where we find underrepresented communities in the clean energy workforce, which it's a pretty broad net. So there's many different use cases that you can make there. For example, female veterans are underrepresented in the workforce currently for the clean energy sector. Certain minorities are seriously underrepresented in the workforce right now for the clean energy sector. And of course, current or former workers from the fossil fuel industry. So if you want greater insight into the target populations that MassCEC is working with, you see the call-out box in the middle, the QR code and the bit.ly link. So if you follow that, you'll get a deeper definition of each of these populations. Plus, there is a map that you can link to from that site that lets you look at where these populations are currently mapped in Massachusetts. In addition to the being an MWBE, those MWBEs have to be entering or currently in a target climate critical sector. So MassCEC is focused on 4 sectors. The first on the left, or actually it might be on your left, the net zero grid, which includes solar and other forms of energy efficiency. The building retrofit and electrification sector, high performance buildings, offshore wind, and then of course transportation, which is EV infrastructure, electric bikes, and all associated work that's going into making that adopted in the state. If you want further insight into these 4 sectors, page 5 of the RFP document itself has these listed out. And then some quick examples of types of MWBEs you might find in those sectors. So a lot of these, are probably very obvious, like the trades contractors, general contractors, HVAC contractors. It could be, and it's not size restricted. We could be talking about sole proprietorships. We could be talking about maybe a contractor that's 3 or 4 years in, and they're a little bigger. They may have 2 or 3 employees. But again, it comes back to whether they meet the criteria of an MWBE. What I would also like to call out is that we have other sort of MWBs that we consider as well. So consultants, that are working, at a different tier, engineering consultants. We have some groups that are talking about, setting up customer service and support type of groups. So there's a wide range, and in the RFP on the page that was mentioned on the previous slide, you should be able to find some further examples. So we've been talking so far about the type of populations we're trying to help, the target populations. The grant itself is designed to award a support partnership to go help those organizations. And the grant is currently, the current round has 4 million total available. We're looking to award up to 1 million per partnership across 3 years. And again, I've been using the word partnership a lot just because we recognize that it's very likely that you'll find that you need different expertise to address the various needs of the MWBEs that you'll be helping. And so if you want to get the RFP document, if you haven't gotten it already, the bit.ly link on the left and the QR code will direct you straight to the page where you can download those documents. If you have trouble getting there, feel free to reach out to us. We'll have the email for the workforce team up at the end of the webinar. And I see that Janelle posted the link directly in the chat too, in case you can't grab the QR code or the bit.ly. So who is eligible to apply to this RFP? Again, partnerships are strongly encouraged. Of course, within the partnership, you will have to have a lead applicant that does, the application process. And lead applicants can be nonprofit organizations, including chambers of commerce, trade associations, and several other types of groups like workforce groups. We also welcome academic institutions, colleges or other groups that have business support programs, and for-profit entities. So, installers themselves who want to expand and support other installers entering the space, energy efficiency contractors who want to expand into supporting other, small businesses. And then in addition to that, you should also consider the additional criteria. The lead applicant, as I mentioned earlier, must have a Massachusetts-based office or staffing. We do check in the Secretary of State's corporation database to see, that you exist in Massachusetts. Applicants, you're not required to have prior experience in the clean energy sector. We're looking for the experience in supporting MWBs. Of course, if you have both, that's a value add and increases your chances of receiving an award. And to be very clear, because in the last round, we found that there's some confusion about this. This grant is not intended to prop up a single MWBE and to increase a single MWBE's capacity. This grant is designed to set up a system to support the ecosystem of MWBs out there. We will have future rounds of grants specifically targeted at increasing the capacity of individual MWBEs, which we hope to announce in the next month or two. So for further information on eligibility, please look at page 7 of the RFP. So just really quickly, here's an example of a partnership. Any of these organizations could be the lead applicant. We don't have, a preference of one type of group over the other, but you can see here, each group can bring a different expertise to the table. The Chamber of Commerce may have access to small business loans. They may be able to provide networking opportunities. An academic institution may have an existing boot camp curricula for entrepreneurship. They themselves might have connections to certain type of employers or procurement processes. And of course, nonprofit organizations might have a direct arm into, many of these smaller businesses that might be able to increase their footprint. And some of them do certification assistance. And of course, we don't want to forget wraparound support, especially for some of the smaller sole proprietorships. They may have other, personal obstacles that you have to address while they're ramping up their business. So with that, we've gone through the eligibility and the general gist of the RFP. We'll get into sort of the scoring, what we're looking for and some program examples, but I'm going to pause here and open up the channel to let people jump in and ask questions about eligibility or any of the target populations. So I'll pause there. Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question, or if you don't want to unmute yourself, feel free to put it into the chat and I'll keep an eye out there, or one of my associates will jump in and read your question.
Hey, Ed, I just have a quick question for you. So this grant is very complementary to the workforce, the Equitable Workforce Grant that was released a few weeks ago. Do you anticipate providing any kind of preference to candidates that are applying for both or leveraging resources from a similar grant for this program. And the specific example would be what many of the small businesses that we're working with are going to be looking for interns and new hires to perform some of these clean energy roles.
Understood. Yes. So there's several layers there. So the first layer is in terms of leveraging resources, other systems in play, other programs that are doing training of different types. We do look favorably upon that. When we get into the scoring, you'll see that there's a whole category about leveraging resources and being part of a bigger ecosystem. Our goal is to increase the ecosystem as a whole. In terms of preference, I don't want to say we give preference if we have an applicant in both pools, because it really comes down to what's being proposed, as well as whether that applicant has the capacity to really do both, which is something we'll be looking very closely at. But in terms of leveraging resources, that is something that's considered favorable.
Thank you.
Yep. So I just saw one question fly by the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself if you do have a question, but I saw someone asking whether all orgs have to be in Massachusetts. Only the lead applicant has to be in Massachusetts. The partners don't necessarily have to be. And then I see a question here. So it says, if we are an MWBE and we have a plan to help other MWBEs gain access to clean energy at their orgs, but they aren't within the targeted sectors, would that be eligible? If we want, i.e., if we wanted to help a community-based org in an EJ neighborhood gain access to clean energy, would it be eligible? So this, in terms of this particular RFP, that may not be an exact fit, because it sounds like what you're doing is providing direct service as opposed to support. And what we could do is, if you circle back around to the workforce team, we could connect you to other opportunities we have at MassCEC that might be a better fit for that sort of opportunity. That said, if the community-based orgs in EJ neighborhoods are themselves minority and women owned, based on the criteria you saw earlier, which is their owners or their founders are greater than 50% minority or women, and you're supporting them in a way that's not a direct service, that could be a potential application, a viable application. Hopefully that answers your question, and if not, feel free to do a follow-up question. Does anyone else have a question? Feel free to unmute, put it into the chat. I see someone said direct service. So the example that was just kind of floated out there is they were helping a nonprofit or CBO get access to clean energy. So the difference is they're not helping the nonprofit or CBO grow their activities in the clean energy space. They're helping them get clean energy service. So that's sort of like matching them with clean energy opportunities, as opposed to matching them with work in the clean energy space. So what we're looking for, maybe like, we'll get to examples later and we'll maybe circle back, but just really quickly, what we're hoping to do, for example, is take a general contractor who is very good at building renovation, and help them understand how to get into building retrofits. And then so the support organization would be helping several contractors that are trying to move in that direction, as opposed to giving that general contractor access to clean energy. Okay, any last questions about eligibility or target populations? If not, we'll move forward in the slides, but feel free to jump in. I'll give you like 5 seconds to enter in a question. Okay, hearing nothing, we'll move on in the slides. So real quickly, the selection criteria. So this is page 11 of the RFP. So we're looking for several things from a successful application. We will, of course, be looking at your experience level and history in terms of working with these populations. And I want to call out, if you look at the bullets, as I said earlier, we're not necessarily looking for support groups that have an extensive clean energy background. We're looking for support groups that have a track record of success of helping small businesses gain access and grow in general in terms of entrepreneurship and establishing, certification as a minority and woman-owned business enterprise. So we have,
Edward, I just want to clarify on that point.
Sure.
Just to not discourage anyone, if your expertise is more in climate critical areas itself, as opposed to working directly with businesses, definitely please still consider the opportunity to reach out. And this is also a good time for us to, work with you on partnerships for those kinds of things. So we very much need folks with both sets of expertise to be partnering around these. Thanks.
Definitely. Thank you, Jennifer. So we will be looking at both ends of the spectrum, as Jennifer just mentioned. Beyond that, the next sort of category, demonstration of market opportunity. MassCEC does have some industry studies that we actually just put out. We have a needs analysis and process that we hope to share soon. So basically, we are looking for clear current gaps in service where MWBEs can find some foothold. And then in terms of program design and completeness of statement of work, we will go a little bit over some program designs later. There's no one size fit all, which we'll talk about in a couple slides in. But we are looking in your design that you're being very mindful about the targeted MWBEs you're looking at and sort of their specific needs and how to help them out. So if you're looking at, tradespeople, they might have different needs. And if you're looking at sort of more financial service type groups or marketing groups, they're all going to have different set of needs and they will need different types of programs to support them. And of course, we are looking for fairly concrete deliverables within that program design. So we're looking at different types of outcomes, whether that's increasing their revenue, increasing their procurement capabilities, or growing their contracts, growing their staff, different avenues. And it doesn't have to be all of the above. It could be a selection of some. Budgeting and cost, we will be looking at whether your cost per participant is reasonable within the scope of what you propose in your program design. We are somewhat flexible within reason, as long as it's merited by the type of program you're delivering. Leverage resources, as we mentioned earlier in the question, we do want to encourage an ecosystem. So if there are other funding sources out there, if there are other MWBE support groups out there that you're partnering with, or if, for example, you form a partnership where you're leveraging a pre-existing, a service out there that's not within your partnership, but that you're going to refer your graduates to or your participants to, those are all things that we'll look favorably upon. And then diversity of approaches, it's sort of the catch-all where we're looking at those other unique elements that you can bring to the table, whether that's your partnership itself as MWBE or SDO certified organization group, whether you're targeting, some of those EJ neighborhoods which aren't required but are value add, whether you're looking at a diverse cross section of different types of MWBs as opposed to just focusing on one. Although we don't want to discourage if you can really help out one type of sector of MWBE, that that's highly encouraged too. So moving on from selection criteria, some examples of business support services that we've seen in our earlier cohorts and generally in best practices. One big need that we see, we know that many of minority and women-owned businesses lack access to capital. There was research put out that shows that the percentage difference of accessing small business loans is somewhere in the 20-30% difference between Caucasian-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. So that's a big gap there. Plus, just I want to call out that we do entertain providing stipends during training. And then in the next major category, supply and demand. Part of the reason MWBEs need support is because they may not have access to the long-standing procurement pipelines that exist out there. Some of you, if you've ever tried to get a state contract, you may have seen Combis, which is a very interesting portal out there to bid on state contracts, and it's somewhat of a tome in terms of being able to navigate it. And at the same time, just making sure that those on the procurement end, the sort of demand end, understand the benefits that MWBEs can bring to the table So there's sort of that both end synergy that we have to look at. Administrative support, the stats out there are fairly clear. Something like 75+% of businesses fail within the first 2 years, and a lot of that has to do with backroom support lack. You have a small staff, you don't have the capacity to file your taxes, you don't have the capacity to chase the legal papers for incorporation. So administrative support can be a big value add for support. And certification, we've talked about that several times. Certain contracts require you to be SDO certified. In other cases, if you're working in certain specific fields, you have to have industry-specific licenses or certifications related to that work. So helping the MWBEs navigate those processes is a great way of supporting them as well. So how might that look in practice? So here's just one type of example. So a partnership forms, they get together and they look at the type of MWBs they're targeting, and they create a program plan, and that may include curriculum. They move into the next stage, which is finding those MWBEs if they don't already have them within their partnerships, and mass marketing out to them. And I want to emphasize the marketing because I'm big on the marketing side of things. You have to be very mindful of reaching people where they're at. So if your MWBEs, are not using the social media, they're not out there on the internet so much, and they're using more word of mouth, you may have to be adaptive and find ways of reaching them, whether that's I'm not being glib here, but getting on a bike and going shop to shop and reaching them. And then the next stage, the partners will begin guiding the MWBEs that are recruited through certification. So this example is a very specific one where they're finding a certain stage MWBE, and the big gap is the certification. So they're doing that, they're helping them through the process. And then once those MWBEs are fairly successful at certification, they work with a Chamber of Commerce or other partnership to match make those MWBEs with procurement opportunities and with companies that are hiring MWBEs. So larger general contractors out there, some of the general construction contractors are huge, and they have preferred lists of MWBE vendors. So helping them get on those lists, for example. And then, of course, the work doesn't just end there. There's ongoing support services, making sure that they continue their best practices at their business, that they continue finding those pipelines, and they continue getting capital and other grants to help them continue expanding their MWBE businesses. So as I said, this is one version of a partner role pipeline, but there's no one size fit all. So we've seen, here's two examples of different sort of combinations of services that are offered. On the left, you have less of a curricula-driven type of program, and it's more of a support program where they're taking in maybe slightly more mature MWBEs and providing them with the back office support to keep growing. They're providing them with the connections to potential opportunities and contracts, and of course access to the capital. Maybe they have connections directly to the Small Business Administration and their small business loan program, or they might even have minority-owned business banks that provide more favorable lending terms to MWBEs. And then on the right, you have a more programmatic kind of curriculum-driven program where you have a boot camp, perhaps given by an higher academic institution, where they provide some entrepreneurship training, maybe for some more startup style MWBEs that are just starting to get out the door, helping them understand what it takes to create a business plan, understanding how to pitch when you do get in the room with someone who can give you a contract. And then, of course, again, certification support, making sure they look to the bigger purchasers, like a strong organization, whether it's through this SDO certification or other licenses, and then helping them get the money they need to grow. So those are two quick examples of different combinations of potential programmatic supports. So we'll have, again, time at the end to ask QA about the selection criteria. But before we get there, here's a quick look at how you actually apply. So you guys are on the first step here. You've gotten the RFP forms. You're attending our webinar, which is in the big orange. There are other informational resources that we offer, though, on the website, which the link was up there earlier, and we'll post it again later. There are lists of different resources out there from like Pew Research and from other state agencies on small business. needs. So take a look at that. And then of course, we're offering multiple office hours after this webinar. And during those office hours, you'll have more opportunity to be a little bit more interactive with MassCEC staff and actually bounce off some ideas with us, and we can provide some level of feedback during those office hours. And as in the green, you can say contact us. You can email it as us at workforce@masscec.com. You can field some ideas in those emails, but again, the best way to get some feedback and bounce ideas back and forth are via the office hours. And thank you, Janelle. She just posted the website where you can scroll down the page and you'll see the office hours. They're open office hours, which means you can just drop in and drop out at any time during the hour. You don't have to sign up. And each office hour has a unique link. So make sure you go to look at that. So to call out the deadline, March 10th, right before midnight, you have to email us all your RFP documents. Anything received after 11:59 will unfortunately not be considered for this RFP solicitation. So that's a quick timeline or flow, that is, of application. And so this is a quick look at what you need to include in your response. So there are 4 different attachments that you have to include. And then you can find on page 9 of the RFP the clear sort of timeline that we just went over in greater detail and explanations about those attachments. I want to call out 2 things right here. You must adhere to the instructions in each attachment. There are word limits that we really want you to take a look at, and we will not be entertaining additional attachments. So even if you have a great pitch deck, please do not attach it. We understand that those are valuable collateral to have in your work, but for the purpose of this application process, we really want these 4 attachments and what's asked for within. So here's a more date-driven look at the flow. So obviously we're at the point of looking at the pre-application webinar, which is the 4th line down. You can see that we have 5 office hours coming up. So again, please feel free to drop into those office hours to ask detailed questions. And again, the deadline is March 10th. Then after the deadline, we'll take some time. If we need to, we will reach out for interviews. And then the award will be announced most likely in May of 2023. Again, office hours, I just want to make sure we emphasize this. The office hours are the best way to get some feedback on your applications. And again, as we said at the beginning, if you are looking for partners to come in with the application, please drop your name, your org, and your contact info in the chat, or you can send us that information at the workforce@masscec.com email address, and we'll compile a list that we'll be posting later. So with that, we'll turn it back to Q&A. And in fact, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen so everyone can see each other. So this is the time where you can feel free to unmute yourself, ask specific questions about the eligibility, about the scoring. You can feel free also to raise questions about concepts at this point as well. And if you do not want to be on the live chat, you can also type it into the text chat. And if you can't think of anything today during this webinar, if you email the workforce@masscec.com email, we will be regularly responding to Q&A and posting answers on the website. So I'm not seeing any questions or seeing anyone unmute themselves. I will give you guys a little bit more space to think. Hopefully I haven't put you all to sleep, and this is more about, hopefully we've answered all your questions that you have today. Well, I see one hand up, great. Todd, feel free to field your question.
Just a quick question, just clarification on the funding. You said there's $4 million, it's $1 million per year for 4 years per partnership, is that correct?
So to clarify, it's $4 million total that in the pot for this solicitation. Each grantee can receive up to $1 million across 3 years, meaning
For 3 years, okay.
yes,
Up to, so it could be whatever the budget is developed. If we have like a $30,000 budget, it could be that for 3 years is what you're saying, right?
Correct,
But
yes,
up to $1 million. Okay, thank you.
yes. Mhm. So I see Jonathan.
Hi, yeah, so I'm just want to clarify for us, we're like a residential heating and air conditioning company. We specialize in heat pump installations. We work with MassSAVE a lot, and that's pretty much the bulk majority of what we do for like ductless and air source heat pumps. Is this something that we could benefit, or is it more because we're usually just dealing more with the consumer, not so much other contractors? So I just wanted to get more clarification on that.
Sure, thank you for the question, Jonathan. So in terms of where your fit would be, if you're looking to grow your business, probably it would be better to look at the next solicitation that we'll be opening soon, probably in February, which is a capacity grant for MWBEs. And that is targeted at individual companies as opposed to setting up a support network to support multiple companies.
So, Ed, just a quick question for you.
Sure.
One of the grant requirements is for us to identify a market size for the specific business that we're supporting. If you look at the MassCEC report, it defines market size from both a GDP, a number of company, and a number of employees perspective. What we're dealing with at UMass Lowell is there are researchers that are building capability for new markets that integrate with existing investments in the ecosystem. But it's not necessarily easily quantifiable from a market size perspective. So do you know how MassCEC would prefer to see some of those metrics?
Sure. I mean, in that case, it sounds like more you could describe the type. It sounds like that they're more defined by their stage of business as opposed to their size, if I'm understanding correctly.
Well, there's a couple things. It's so yes, it's stage of business, but also potential GDP impact and total addressable market. Yeah, we're just trying to figure out the appropriate way to categorize the stage.
Sure. I mean, that's basically my response would be to, if you give as much detail as possible based within your criteria to help us understand how you're defining who you're going to recruit, that would be a sufficient response. It doesn't have to be, a round peg going into a square hole. Like, we don't need it to fit exactly our definitions in terms of what's out there on the MassCEC report, as long as you can justify through your data how you're going to recruit.
Thank you.
So I don't see any other hands, but I will give you guys a couple seconds, minutes to see if you have any thoughts. So if not, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw back up the slide. And so the next slide should be, just in case you didn't get it earlier, this is the email address, which you can use for multiple purposes. One is to send us questions. The other is to send your contact info in case you're looking to form partnerships with other individuals looking at this application. And just general use for workforce related items. Also, I would advise you to sign up on our website itself. Basically, on almost every page at the very bottom, there's a subscription list for email notifications. So, for example, as we release the next capacity grant, if you sign up to the list, you'll be sure that you get that notification. And as a disclaimer, because of the way my screens are set up, I don't necessarily see if you raise your hand, so I will invite my colleagues to let me know if someone's raising their hand. And I see Camilla did put into the chat box the subscription link. So if you want to subscribe for the notices, please feel free to click there and sign up. You can narrow down and say you only want to receive workforce notices, for example. And not hearing any other questions or seeing any chat, I will say, I will give you back some time, but I will also stop sharing to see if anyone's raising their hand. Okay, well, seeing no further questions, thank you again for coming today to this webinar. We hope to see you at the office hours, and we hope to see you come in with applications. So we're here if you need to ask us anything via the email addresses and the future office hours. Thank you again.